All right, my name's Iona and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. First thing I want to do is say a massive thank you to everyone who's coming and a big welcome. This event, Dynamic Safety Planning, is part of 16 days of action to end gender-based violence. Kent Integrated Domestic Abuse Service have 16 events running between now and the 10th of December to inform, educate and inspire action, so that we can all make domestic abuse everybody's business. Because domestic abuse is everybody's business and everyone can make a difference, which is what you're doing by attending today. The event, during the event, you're able to use the Q&A text box, which is just to the right-hand side of your screen. And so you can ask questions for Tina. As the moderator, I'm going to publish these as we go along, and you're then able to upvote those. Tina's going to be speaking for approximately half an hour, and then we'll have about half an hour for questions as well. I just want to note that in your email confirmations, it shows that the webinar is slightly longer so that we don't get cut off by the system, but we are planning to be about an hour. So use those thumbs up to upvote any questions. I'll keep them going through the session. So keep an eye on those, upvote any that you love. If you want to follow up any of them, you can type follow up and do a little dash, and I'll try and fit those questions together for us. Right, so that just leaves me with the wonderful job of introducing Tina. Tina has worked for Oasis Domestic Abuse Service for 23 years, having lived in their Thanet refuge with her 2 children. She started working for Oasis as a part-time housekeeper, moving to roles that have included refuge worker and Marek Idva, working with those that are deemed to be high risk of serious harm. Tina is now the head of operations, but continues to support people face-to-face by regularly volunteering to facilitate groups such as the Phoenix programme. Tina is most passionate about training, using her expertise to ensure that as many people as possible truly understand the tactics of a perpetrator, the trauma that is suffered, often after the relationship has ended, and why it's so important to make referrals for support. So there you go, Tina, take it away.
Thank you, Iona. I live up to myself now, haven't I, when I say that training is my most favourite thing to do. What I will say is that anybody that's listening to this that is a victim of domestic abuse, a telephone number should be on your screen right now of 0808 1689 111. Now that's going to come up at the end. It's also going to be flashed up on our screens. So make sure that if you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, some of those things have been concerning to me and I think maybe I need a safety plan, then you need to give that telephone number a call, and eventually that will get you through to additional services if that's felt that is needed for you. So don't be sitting listening to this and thinking, oh, that's me and I need someone to talk to. Please do call that number and talk to somebody. So what we're going to be looking at is the fact that actually when we say talk to somebody, I'm not the expert. I might have been doing this for a very long time and I may have been a victim of domestic abuse. However, I'm not the expert. You are. I use the word victim because actually I prefer to be called a victim rather than a survivor. I am proud of the journey that I've made and the place that I'm at today. And so actually I have no problem with anyone calling me a victim of domestic abuse. Something was done unto me. I didn't do it to myself. What I have to do myself, though, is to find a way to protect myself and my children. And sometimes we're able to do that on our own, and sometimes we need somebody else's help. But if we're seeking help, what we need to consider is that the people at the other end of the phone are not the experts, we are. General safety planning for all, I'm going to touch on, and we're going to look a little bit about personalised safety planning. We're very keen as professionals to tell people to leave abusive relationships, but unfortunately at the point of leaving or having just left, you are more at risk than ever before. So if you're going to advise someone to leave, then we need to make sure that they've got a plan. Legal planning, there's lots of legal measures now in the world that can support us with leaving, so we're going to touch on that, and then we're going to end with about changing the plans, because obviously life changes, situations change, and we need to make sure that actually we are able to change our plans alongside it. So who is the expert? Well, the expert is the victim, actually, because they know the perpetrator best. They absolutely know what's likely to be coming. They know some of the triggers that are going to press buttons that sometimes end in violence, but often end in bad behaviour such as sulking. And it's that sulking we know that ends up with us walking on eggshells. So they know, actually, and have absolutely created their own plans. What we need to do as professionals is enhance those plans and support that planning. We can't ever say to somebody that their plan isn't the right plan, because it's what they feel is achievable. And I think that's the most important thing about this, is that we have to make sure that what we plan with people is achievable for them. You know, being a victim of domestic abuse makes life difficult at best. You know, sometimes getting out of bed in the morning is as much as you can achieve. You get out of bed, you send your children to school, you walk into Tesco's on the way back and spend what little money you have on the provisions, probably for their packed lunch the next day, maybe dinner tonight. You might go home and look at the state of your house and think, I just can't do that today, and go back to bed until you have to pick your children up from school, because then there's going to be a massive effort to behave like nothing is wrong in your world in front of your children. If we're going to safety plan for you to leave, actually now you've got to leave. You've got to get up, you've got to pack your stuff, you've got to do that in a safe way. And if we're looking at refuge accommodation, maybe you've got to go to the other ends of the world. And if you're a male, there are not that many refuges around for you either. So it's got to be an achievable plan. No, I work in a refuge, and sometimes just getting out of bed is all that our residents can do today. When we see them dressed with a bit of makeup, we're all really pleased, because it's obviously a good day. And maybe tomorrow we won't see them at all because it's a bad day and they're still in bed. So it's really imperative that as a professional, if you're looking at a safety plan, it must be an achievable plan. So planning for everybody are quite simple things. I would recommend that you tell somebody that you absolutely trust with your life, maybe, things that are going on for you. Who can you talk to? Have you got a social worker that you feel that you could be honest with? Maybe not. Have you got a best friend that you feel you could have that conversation with? Well, best friends are great, but sometimes they try to defend us. Sometimes they jump in and try to help us. And actually, sometimes that's not what we need to keep ourselves safe. So every victim will know who they can trust, whether there is anyone that they can trust, because, of course, if they're isolated, there may be nobody. But code words are a great thing to do. So you might have two code words. It could be that one code word is, can we go to McDonald's for breakfast tomorrow, in a text? And maybe that actually means, can you call the police for me? Because I'm too frightened to do so myself. Being caught dialing 999 on my own phone may increase my risk. So actually, if I can text my friend, how about McDonald's, maybe they can phone 999 for me. Or maybe you might have another text word. Maybe you've just got a series of numbers or something that you're going to text somebody. And that means any chance of popping around for a cup of tea, because you might be able to diffuse the situation. So if you're going to use your phone and you're going to text, you need to make sure that your phone is with you at all times, wherever possible. And it says on here, charged with credit. Getting your phone credit on your phone is very often difficult if you're a victim of financial abuse. Having it charged all the time, some of us don't even have electricity. So, you know, this is about what is achievable. Consider your safety at work. What happens if you don't turn up at work tomorrow? So we've had a staff member that hasn't come into work here today. We've waited an hour and a half before she's come into the building, and then gone to her manager to find out where she is and if she's okay. And she's not a victim of domestic abuse. We're just worried about her. As a victim of domestic abuse, I would have had a timeline for her to come into work. And if she wasn't in, what am I going to do then? Because I'm not just going to willy-nilly send the police out. That could increase somebody's risk. What is the plan? If you've got a plan with your employer, what does it look like? If it is that they've not attended and they've not been at work by 9:30, I'm going to call you. If you've not answered the phone on the fourth ring, then I'm going to send the police round. What does the plan look like? And does everybody know what the plan is supposed to be? Consider safety planning with your children, and we're going to go on to that in a minute. And that might seem an odd thing to say, but every child has the capacity of hearing a safety plan, and we'll look at that in a sec. Keeping in regular contact with somebody. In a perfect world, you're going to be working with one of the services around the Kent area that's here to support you. And we are really lucky in the Kent area that there is lots of support available for people. So keeping in regular contact with maybe your IDVA, your community worker or a volunteer would be a great way for us to know that you're safe. And what's the safety plan with that worker? Avoid unsafe spaces in your home. I hear people say very regularly, go to the room where there's a lock. Unfortunately, the bathroom is usually the place where there's a lock, and the bathroom isn't very safe. You know, there's water in the bathroom, which we know could lead to awful situations you finding yourself in, but it's also a small space. Most of us have tiny bathrooms. It wouldn't take a lot to kick in a bathroom door. So actually what we need to consider is the bathroom is not necessarily a safe space. There's going to be things that are hard that we may be hit with. There's baths that we could land off and injure ourselves. And most bathroom doors will be kicked in one kick. So, no, those small confined spaces are not necessarily going to be safe for you. But actually, the front room would be bigger space. That might be a better space for you. Your own bedroom. Could you put a bedroom lock on your door if you're no longer in that relationship? That might be a safer space for you. The kitchen is never going to be a safe space. In fact, we would recommend that if you're one of these people that have got these lovely knife blocks on your kitchen side, get rid of your lovely knife block and put the knives in the drawer, because it's much easier to just grab a knife off the side and use it when actually maybe that wasn't the intention in the first place. That just happened to be the nearest weapon. And of course, there's heavy pots, heavy pans and irons and things like that in the kitchen. And again, in the garage, there's going to be an awful lot of things that could be used as weapons against you. So that's what we mean by unsafe spaces in the home. Avoid those areas. One of the things that we would really recommend is that you keep evidence in a safe way, and that might include talking to your GP. Your GP is likely to be able to write these things down on your medical forms, and that's going to give you some evidence. Now, that could be the evidence that you may need in the future. You might not necessarily want to call the police today, but you might need to in the future, and the police are going to be your best defence to stop that abuse from happening immediately. So you might need to consider calling the police if you feel that that's what you're able to do right now. If not, then try and keep some evidence. Now, it's not always going to be possible to keep pictures on your phone or messages on your phone or write yourself emails, because maybe they'll be checked. I worked with a lady once who used to have code numbers. So she'd put 1 for a physical assault, 2 for emotional abuse, 3 for financial abuse. And she would just text herself these numbers as a bit of a reminder that that's how frequently things happened. It wouldn't have been able to be used in evidence because she didn't remember exactly what it was, but it gave her a picture of actually the fact that this was getting worse and this was happening more often. So for her, it was useful because it meant that she was able to monitor what happened in her world. But evidence is sometimes needed in family courts. If you're talking about children and child contact, that's definite evidence that I would recommend that you keep, as well as keeping that evidence for the police. Other agencies at the moment are again talking a lot about a bag to flee. I would recommend that if you are still in a relationship with somebody, you don't pack a bag that can be found, because that's going to lead to an awful lot of questions that you may not be in a position to answer. So you could pack a small bag, maybe a couple of pounds towards the bus fare to be able to flee, maybe some telephone numbers, maybe a spare set of car keys or a spare set of door keys that you're able to hide somewhere in a place that you really feel is not going to be found. If you're no longer in a relationship, then you can pack huge bags with things in, the copies of children's prescriptions, birth certificates. There's an awful lot of things that you can pack in a bag. On our website, you've got details. On the Oasis website, you've got details of what to pack in a bag. Women's Aid have got details. Respect have also got details of what you could pack in your bag if you wanted to look them up. But packing a bag when you're in a relationship could be something that raises suspicion, which then places you at more risk. So personalised safety planning for leaving is something that we would recommend for everybody if you're really concerned that excuse me, ending a relationship is going to make you unsafe, because it is the time that you're going to be most unsafe. As perpetrators who want to control us, the biggest loss of control is when we leave, because we often won't have been given permission to do that. So that's going to be your most unsafe time. Again, you need to really tell someone you trust your code words and use your code words to make sure that if you're not heard of for a couple of days or for a couple of hours, actually, then you can have that, then somebody can raise the alarm for you. So maybe on the day that you're leaving, you're planning to take the children to school, pack up a few bits and pieces in your house. Then the plan is to collect the children from school at, let's say, 11 o'clock. If your best friend and trusted confidant is aware of that and you haven't phoned them then, let's say, by 11:15, well, then they need to raise the alarm. Have you been to the school? So have them phone the school. If you haven't been to the school, then let the police know if you're that seriously concerned about somebody. It's about having plans in the first place. Fleeing in the middle of the night, how are you going to get out? Can you go by the front door? Are the keys always hidden so that you can't leave the house of a night time? Have you got a back door key? Is there any way that you could get a spare key cut? Where are you going to go? Are you going to be able to take your children with you? Because sometimes it's recommended that children are left in bed because there hasn't been any major incident and you can collect them tomorrow. Don't leave your children in bed. Take your children with you no matter what the circumstances, because you may find it really difficult to get them back. So plan your escape routes. If something happens that is worse than usual, what are you going to do about it? Where are you going to go? And what are you going to take with you? As I said, taking a bag is a great thing to do if you're not in a relationship. And let's not forget, domestic abuse doesn't end when the relationship ends. So it may be that you're no longer living with the perpetrator and you can pack a bag very easily. And where are you going to go to? So there are refuges across the Kent area. We're very lucky to have refuges in localised to us. There's also refuges across the county. It is possible to get into refuge at the moment while there's COVID lockdown, and agencies would very much help for you to locate a refuge at this time. Again, just phone the number that's been given to you. Phone any one of the DA services and we'll support you. If you're going to leave, then think about updating the police. If the police are very aware of your circumstance and you're leaving, let the police know where you're going, and let social services know where you're going if you're working with them as well. Because otherwise it could be that everyone's terrified that you're lost to us and we don't know where you are, when actually this is part of a really good plan of yours and you've been able to hide so incredibly well that nobody is able to find you. If of course, leaving an abusive relationship doesn't mean necessarily that you're leaving the home. There are legal measures that we'll come on to in a minute whereby you can leave that relationship and get some orders in which to keep you safe, having ended that relationship. So it could be that if you're the one that's staying, you need to change your routines and your regular appointments. If you've got health appointments and you don't want to be found, then try and change the date and time of those health appointments. Otherwise, it's very easy just to walk to the local clinic or hospital and find you. Change your routines. If you get your payment on a Monday and you always go to Asda on a Monday, well, then try to go to Asda try to go to Tesco's on a Tuesday. That change of routine, because it's very much we don't know whether you're being stalked and harassed unless you keep seeing someone because they're stalking and harassing you. Was it an accidental meeting? If you've changed your shopping days from a Monday on Asda to a Tuesday in Tesco's and keep seeing the perpetrator, well, the chances are that we've got some stalking and harassment going on here. And think about your e-safety. So I'm a 53-year-old woman. I can't do this on my own without our Iona being with me. I've just done some training for the police, and I'm sure they get my face 1 minute and the message another minute and something else another minute, because I'm not very good at these things. We must make sure that our e-safety is in place. Turn off your phones and your locations, particularly if you're going to go to refuge. We don't know whether your car's been bugged. It is possible for children's toys to be bugged. Any toys, if you're going to be taken with you, look on them, make sure that you can't see anything unusual. Is there different stitching on that teddy bear that little Johnny always carries around somewhere? And there are, again, you only need to Google how to be safe. For e-safety, there's lots of websites that would give you that information, as well as calling us, and as long as it's not me, we won't be able to help you. There are many people that will be able to. Safety planning with your children. So is it possible to safety plan with a 3-year-old? I remember watching a programme a number of years ago and a 6-year-old was given a full safety plan, and it made me feel quite worried for that little boy, holding on to all of that information and being responsible for checking the windows and checking the doors every night. No child should be held to that level of responsibility. Although our older children, certainly teenage children, could be made more aware of our safety planning. But be mindful that if we're telling our children that we're leaving, they're holding an awful lot of information against somebody, potentially, if that perpetrator is their mum or their dad, they're holding secrets that makes it not their responsibility to do. But even a 3-year-old could have a safety plan. Even a 3-year-old, you could say to, when mummy tells you to, I want you to go upstairs and I want you to put on Frozen. And I want you to count how many times Olaf loses his nose and don't come down until it's finished. That's a safety plan. If you've got that with your child and that DVD player is set up that they can go upstairs, or heaven forbid at 3 they could get on the Disney Channel and watch it, that they would be able to protect themselves by being out of the way. That's not harmful to any child. It's not giving them any indication to panic. You've made it fun and you've kept them away from any incidents that might injure them. Child contacts and handovers, when you're talking about going into court, you need to keep yourself safe. It's something that you need to talk about, is safety for yourself as well as your children at handovers. So the legal option there might be a child arrangement order, where there is a proper plan of what days children are with the abusing parent, what days they are with the non-abusing parent, what times they've got to be returned, how long for, whether they're going to go to you this Christmas and somebody else next Christmas. All of those things can be planned in a child arrangement order. And in addition to that, a prohibitive steps order is something that prohibits a particular behaviour. So it could simply say that those children live with dad and then visit mum. So both of those orders are available, and across the county we have one-stop shops in every area. They used to be outside of COVID that you could go in and there would be a police officer and there would be somebody from the DA world, there would be a solicitor, there might be someone from housing, there'd be multi-agency there to support you. Those haven't changed. They're just on the phone and very often just talking to those DA support services. And we're looking as quickly as we can ways to get multi-agencies on board. And I know in some areas they've already reopened. So there's a DA website. Just go onto the Kent and Medway Domestic Abuse website and that will give you the details of those telephone numbers. And of course, we need to make sure that schools and colleges are aware of what's going on. The last thing we want is that, you know, little Amy is at school and being genuinely terrified of everybody because life is bad at home and no one at school knowing why. So we need to make sure that we talk to our schools. If we're leaving, you don't have to tell the school where you're going. You just have to let them know that you're leaving so that they're very aware of what's going on. For our Black minority ethnic community, we need to be aware that they may have additional needs. Now, we talk about honour-based violence and forced marriage for victims within our Muslim community, but actually, what about our gypsy travellers? There's very much honour-based violence often within their world. So we have to be mindful that their needs may be different. Domestic abuse may not be condoned by all families, but infrequently it's not questioned or challenged. Who can you trust if you're in that situation? Is your whole community somebody that you would have to be fearful of? Now, that's going to be very rare, but it will happen occasionally. Just exactly the same as I live on an estate where everybody knows everybody else's business. I've got to be careful who I would tell if I was going to go anywhere, because I don't know who's going to disclose that information. We just need to be mindful that when you live within a community environment, that whole community might not be safe. Maybe you haven't got any recourse to public funds, which means you don't have any access to benefits. And that's going to be something that will really restrict your movements. Maybe there are concessions available for you. Maybe you are going to be able to claim benefits and don't know about it. And that's about talking to somebody. You can phone any of our helplines and speak anonymously. You don't have to give any details, and we will be able to give you some support of where to go to find out whether or not you're going to be entitled to benefits. And of course, we've got to consider your religious, cultural, and your own beliefs. We have many women that live in our refuges. You know, it's really important that they're able to follow their own dietary needs, that they're able to go to the mosque, that their children are able to go to the mosque. We just need to do all of these things in a safe way. And of course, if many people are terrified, if you've come in on a spousal visa, you may be terrified that you're going to be deported out of the country. So we have to consider all of those additional fears and all of those additional needs. And bearing in mind that for some, this is a loss of your whole family, your whole community. That's a massive ask if we're considering that you need to leave a domestic abuse relationship and leave everybody in your world behind. If you have disabilities, of course, there are going to be additional measures that we have to take. Both mental and physical disabilities may prevent someone from being able to take action. If you're a wheelchair user, it's going to be much more difficult for you to be able to literally leave that home. But it could be, as I've already mentioned at the beginning of this, that just getting out of bed today is too difficult. We get many people that say, family members often that contact us and say, well, you know, they don't have any capacity. They need adult social services. They're not leaving. They're not ending that relationship. There's something wrong with them. Well, for many people, that isn't the case. Actually, they do have the capacity. They are just too fearful to leave. And that's something that we really want people to be able to understand. Of course, there are those that need that additional support from social services because they don't have the capacity. But for most, actually, they do. They're just sometimes looking after their own safety. We know leaving is the time when you're at most risk. Maybe that's why they're not. So we need to consider mobility issues if we're talking about safety planning. And maybe tools such as lifeline alarms can be used for issues of domestic abuse as well as issues of mobility, so that we look at somebody that's not willing to discuss their domestic abuse, not willing to lose the carer actually that is there looking after their medication and their personal needs on a daily basis. That's a big ask for us to say, well, we're going to find you somewhere else to go, or we've got to ask them to go somewhere else. That's a massive change of your life and absolutely terrifying when you're dependent on another human being. So we need to consider carers and making the appropriate referrals to get that extra help. And as agencies, if we're attending people's houses, we must make sure that we go. There is absolutely nothing worse than psyching yourself up to say, do you know what? I'm terrified and you need to help me. And then the person that's supposed to help you doesn't turn up. So we must keep our appointments. Legal measures, all of these again can be looked up online. Restraining orders are, if you've gone into a criminal case, you could get a restraining order that gives you additional protection at the end, that prevents the perpetrator from doing something. That could be contacting you, going to your road or your address, but in some way from not being able to approach you. Non-molestation order is a civil version of that very law. And of course, if perpetrators attend, then it's a crime and they would be arrested. So that both of these orders are available, whether you're in the judicial process with a restraining order or whether you're not, for a non-molestation order. And what if your perpetrator is a teacher or a police officer or somebody that's going to lose their job if you go through the criminal proceedings? A non-molestation order is a civil route to be able to do that, and only then involves the police if they breach that order. Domestic violence protection orders can be offered by the police that can ask somebody to leave the property for a short period of time till a longer order is put in place, usually 24, 48 hours. Longer orders, orders can then be extended for up to 28 days, again, that prevent perpetrators coming from the house, going to the house or contacting you in some way. And the police can help reinforce those with you. Domestic violence disclosure scheme, or Clare's law, is where if you're entering a new relationship or in a relationship and you've got those niggles that make you feel that this might not be a safe relationship, you can request from the police that they look into any criminal history of maybe your new partner to find out if there's something of concern. Now, of course, that's gives you great information if there is something of concern, and you can then make a decision as to whether you stay in that relationship or not. But remember, not all perpetrators have come across the police. Not all victims disclose their abuse to the police, so not all perpetrators are arrested, and therefore it could be that they are a perpetrator. There's just no criminal record. We've also now got new stalking protection orders that are available for the police to use for cases of stalking. There are forced marriage protection orders that are available. And of course, at all times, the police will be able to help you with your safety by calling 999 in emergency or 101. What we need to consider is when we are supporting somebody, they will go through stages where sometimes they're absolutely adamant that they're ending this relationship, and sometimes this is the best relationship that they've ever been in. And it makes sometimes no sense to us. How is it that you can switch so quickly? Well, part of that is the the cycle of abuse, which is what we've got on the screen now. Every relationship starts in the honeymoon period. Once we come out of the honeymoon period, there's a period of calm, and that's when we're feeling great and we're feeling safe. In abusive relationships, the tension is going to build and build until there's a blow up, and that could be physical abuse, that could be a major argument, that could be that they leave and return. It could be all kinds of ways that abuse happens. But what we then go back into is a honeymoon period where perpetrators are very sorry and they're going to go and seek some help, and they're never going to do anything like that again. They're never going to drink, they're never going to do anything that would harm you, and it's because of their mental health or because they had a drink yesterday, and they're going to seek some help and it's going to be great, and it's a honeymoon period and we're all very happy again. And then you'll have a period of calm, and then there'll be the tension, and then there'll be the abuse. Sometimes the honeymoon period disappears totally. Sometimes those periods of calm reduce. But often we go to tension building abuse and tension building abuse. If, as professionals, we try to support somebody during the honeymoon period, they're not as likely to listen to the safety planning because everything's all right in their world. So we have to consider, is there frequency in abuse? Is there severity? Is it just getting worse on a day-to-day business? Is there any child or adult protection issues? And if there is, you all know that you've got to make those referrals to those appropriate services. Are there additional stresses? Has somebody just lost their job? Because that will make them more stressed and likely to reduce these periods of calm within that relationship. So be aware, giving a full, long, in-depth safety plan to somebody in a honeymoon period who just wants the world to go away so that they can be with the person that they love, that's not going to be received as well as it is while they're actually in that tension building. And we know that lots of victims leave before we get to that next cycle of abuse. There are services across the county that will support you. We will support you as professionals if you need to talk to somebody. That's the details of Kent Integrated Domestic Abuse Service, for whom I work. And if you call the telephone number there, that's going to put you through to victim support. They will support you or send you out to your localised service, who will also support you. We've got lots of Ken services. I've mentioned one-stop shops. We've got Sign Health that would support you if you're deaf. We've got Phoenix programs, and I know there's another webinar that's coming up about the Phoenix program. If you're interested in that, it's absolutely fantastic, and Iona is leading that, so please sign up to that one, which I think is coming towards the end of the week. We've got the Community Domestic Abuse Program, which is offering support to male perpetrators of domestic abuse to see how they can manage their behaviour. There's lots of children's support. We've also got help for anyone that's been sexually abused. So Beach House offers free support and practical help to anyone across Kent and Medway. And Family Matters offers counselling and support to those that have been sexually abused. If you want details of any Kent services, we have a website that would give you any areas that you want to know about. Click on that area of the map and that will give you all of the services that are able to support you. There are also national services. So if you wanted to get into refuge, there's the National Domestic Violence Helpline. There are NCDV will help you with those non-molestation orders that I've just been talking about. Hourglass is looking to support you if you are an elderly victim of domestic abuse, and Rights for Women are going to give you lots and lots of legal advice regarding immigration that is way beyond anything that we would be able to give to you. There's stalking helplines, there are services for honour-based violence, and there are lots of services for men. In addition to all of those services that we're up on for KIDAS, because we would all support males and females across the county. So there's lots of help, there's lots of safety planning. The one thing all you need to do is ask. As a professional, please call us. As a victim of domestic abuse, definitely give us a call. And I think Iona's going to look at questions.
For me, Tina, if that's all right.
Well, as long as it's not a difficult one.
Oh, I wouldn't do that to you. The honeymoon period always fascinates me, and I wondered if you could talk maybe a little bit about sort of safety planning. I know you've talked about safety planning in those sort of different phases, but how that sort of affects sort of minimising the abuse, and how you can help safety plan with someone who is minimising the abuse quite a lot.
So the safety planning good question, Iona. Safety planning in the honeymoon period, or the periods of calm, are, they need to be basic plans. They don't need to be anything that makes you feel like you're judged. Because as a victim of domestic abuse, I will already be feeling guilty about something, particularly if I've got children. I will fear that you're all going to say something that is going to push away from this period of honeymoon and calm and into this period of build-up of abuse. So anything that's said in front of somebody that's being abusive towards me is going to terrify me. If I tell you my secrets and actually give you details of what's going on, you're likely to go and tell somebody else, aren't you? Are you going to tell social services? Are you going to tell the police? So I think during that honeymoon period and during that period of calm, that's the time that they need to be, look, I'm here for you. I'm not going to push. I'm going to be around. You could always come to my house if you needed to, if that was your friend. Or maybe you're going to start leaving leaflets around that are of interest to you that they can have a look at. When we get into the abuse starting to escalate a little bit more, well, then that's absolutely when people are more likely to be honest about what's going to happen. And you could, and we have had it, have people rock up at the one-stop shop with their bags and say, I can't go home. I know that what's coming in my direction and I can't go home. And at that point, you can have really in-depth safety plans. But as a friend or a family member, even as a professional, it's very difficult to put huge constrictions on people that you must do this and you must do that and you've got to adhere to this, when somebody just wants to stop being hurt and have a break from that. And that's what the honeymoon period affords you, is a break from all of that abuse.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tina. So we've got one question here from Sally that's had a few upvotes, and that's about whether there's a safety planning template that could get people started with thinking about these personalised safety planning.
So if you go onto the Women's Aid website, they've got some lovely safety planning documents there. I'm sure that we've got an aid memoir that we could very probably put up somewhere that people could have a look at. At some point. I know that there's potentially one on all of our websites in the Kent area within KIDAS. There'll be a safety plan. But what I'll do is I'll see if I can get one attached somehow, somewhere, that will magically appear. And as I said, it's technology. I won't know how to do it. But if you're wanting a plan today, if this is something that you're worried about today, male or female, I would go onto the Women's Aid website. They have some great details of safety planning. In fact, just type in safety planning in DA and you'll get up an awful lot of suggestions from that. And it's going to be those basics, like I said, code words, small things if you haven't left, code words with friends and family, talking to people and making sure that they know what's going on in your world.
Brilliant. And that sort of safety planning for children. So we've got one from Elisa. Can you advise safety planning for children experiencing domestic abuse, not necessarily to leave, but to keep them safe in the home?
So I think the main one is to have children out of the way at all times. We need to make sure that our children accidentally get hurt in domestic abuse situations all the time. Social services become involved because maybe a plate was thrown across the room and it's bounced off the wall and landed in the Moses basket. And there was never any intention for that child to be injured under those circumstances. So the priority really is to make sure our small children are out of the way. For our older children, we can have exactly the same code words, very much. A trusted family member. So if they got a nan or a granddad or an auntie or somebody that they can really go and have a conversation with. My daughter was just in an abusive relationship, and I've become the confidant of my 17-year-old granddaughter, which is really, really tough, actually. It's hard to hear that she's unhappy or that she's felt frightened or felt unsafe. And it's a tough place to be. But so having a confidant, if possible, for that child, and that could be someone at the school. It could be a mentor. It could be a flow. It could be someone that they have in the school that offers them that discussion, so that actually mentally they feel safe as well as physically they feel safe. So those code words, if they're older children, it could be that you have honest conversations. It could be that you're considering leaving that relationship, and you have that honest conversation with those children. You just have to make sure that you do it in a safe way. So it's very difficult for me to say teenage children you can have that conversation, because of course some children wouldn't be able to listen to all of that concern and worry. I remember working with a lady a long time ago now who had an 8-year-old boy who within school had been told that when there was a fire, it was Kent Fire Rescue had gone out and done some brilliant work. Plan your escape for a fire. Make sure your fire alarms work. And he'd driven his mother mad over these flipping fire alarms around the house. And what he'd done is he'd made a plan, actually, to, if dad came round, and dad is always arrested because he hurts mum when he comes round, and dad's not supposed to be around, made a safety plan to tie his sheets together and lower his 3-year-old brother out of the window, who would then go next door and knock for help. Well, of course, they did lower the 3-year-old out of the window when dad rocked up, and potentially it saved mum's life. But that was a 3-year-old going out of the window of sheets that were tied together. It's like something out of a horror movie. And it did turn out to be okay in the end, but that was the absolute worst thing that little boy could have planned to do. In fact, he planned to go out the window himself, but then realised that his brother and sister weren't able to let him out, to handle his weight out the window. So we must be realistic with our plans with our children without scaring them, and that would include informing the school. So code words, safe routes, being home on time, where are you going after school, telling the truth. If they desperately want to see the abusive parent, telling the truth about that is really important, because that's how we keep safe.
Brilliant. We've got one question from Joanna, who's talking about stalking protection orders and about eligibility for those. Is there anything we can say on that? So
the stalking protection orders are brand new, and if there's any police officers in the room, I'm just about to probably say something that is absolutely inaccurate, but stalking protection orders can be granted by the police. It's the police that go off and get these orders on our behalf. Stalking is unwanted behaviour, and it's the most bizarre thing, but in order for somebody to know that they're stalking, they have to be told that they're stalking. So you almost have to say to somebody, please don't contact me again, because I'll contact the police, or I don't want that contact. But once that you know that there's that contact is not wanted, then the police can go and apply for stalking protection orders themselves. You just have to have been stalked. A course of conduct that is unwanted. That's what that's what the police would be looking for.
Brilliant. So there's a really interesting one from Emma, who attended another webinar on Friday, where they made the point of saying that plans need to be for the long term. There's this concern that, if I leave for refuge, what's going to happen after, my children, where are they going to go to school? What's going to happen to them? Will I end up on the street? So it's about how we can reassure victims of their future being better if they leave than getting support, than not getting the support now.
Do you know what? I think the difficulty is, if I'm entirely honest, I lived in the refuge that I'm sitting in right now. It's not going to get better immediately. What's likely to happen if you end up going into refuge is you are going to be safer. That's the word that you need to use. You are going to be safer. I tell you that most victims of domestic abuse know what their day is going to look like as the key of the perpetrator goes in the door. Well, that's not what you're going to have to manage. That's not what you're going to have to deal with. The actual safety of your children and yourself is not something you're going to have to look for if you're going to go into refuge. However, what is likely to have happened is that you've been running on absolute empty, on automatic, on robotic mode to be able to manage to keep yourself and your children safe. And you are likely to have a couple of weeks of feeling absolutely awful when you get here, where actually the reality of what's happened to you is going to come back. I can't, we've had fashion shows downstairs in this refuge this morning. We have children running around that are absolutely delightful and making us smile all day long. It is not the worst place to go and live, but it isn't home. It's tough. And if you come into refuge and there are a couple of people that are not going to be kind, that's not going to be easy. So I think the thing is that we need to be realistic. You could be in refuge for a year. You could be staying at a family or friend's house for a year before you're housed somewhere. You're looking at over £1,000 before you can get any kind of accommodation. So it's about our use of language. It won't be easy, but it will be safe. And eventually, all of the things that you want to do with your world are there for you to do. You just need to be safe enough to be able to do that. So I think let's not, build up the hopes of people that you're going to go to refuge and life is going to be great. It's not going to be great. It's not going to be easy, but it is going to be safe so long as you don't tell anybody where you are. So realistic expectations always, please, when you're talking to victims, because life can be incredible. I love my life because 23 years ago I did what I needed to do to keep my children safe, but it hasn't been easy necessarily to get to this point today.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it, that all of the losses, we're asking a victim to do an awful lot, and it involves an awful lot of losses. We're talking about, pets and homes and belongings, and we're asking all of those losses are all up front. And all of these potential you loving your life now, that's, a far off distant future that may or may not happen.
And I say this, there are people that come into refuge and absolutely love it, literally from the day that we're here. In fact, we had a lady came into refuge very many years ago in her 80s, who had cancer when she came in and died shortly after. She lived in her own property, and just before she died, she told me that if she could have 10 years of living with a perpetrator, or the 8 months that she had not living with the perpetrator, she would take all 8 months all day long. And actually, she'd gained children, she'd gained grandchildren, she'd had the best time of her life, including living in refuge. So, it's not easy, but it's not the worst time in the world. My children absolutely remember this as one of the best times in their life.
So Siobhan has said that you mentioned having a plan with your workplace. Are victims really comfortable disclosing such a private issue with a manager? What obligation is there on an employer to support a victim?
Well, the obligation, everybody should have a domestic abuse policy, and any one of your agencies around would be able to help you. ION has written a number of domestic abuse policies for agencies, including some that you would really think would have domestic abuse policies, actually. Yes, you're right. It is going to be difficult. I would sincerely hope that somebody here would be able to talk to me. And actually, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Working in a DA world and speaking about DA. There's a bigger ask on that. Sometimes it's that we will do that. Aldi's have been incredible with a worker very recently, have transferred her over to another area when we've moved her to refuge, have been absolutely just out of this world supporting. I don't know whether it's gone yet, but there was a how to support as an employee webinar, isn't there, Iona, that's coming up?
There is, and I was thinking, I think it's on Wednesday, but do go to the KIDAS conference website and have a little look, because there is going to be a really good webinar on that coming up soon.
So if you want more details, then that's the place to go as an employer. I think that the issue is that it's almost impossible to talk to anybody as a victim of domestic abuse. It's the biggest secret that any of us will ever keep. But there gets to the point where usually within that cycle of abuse, where you're now entering into that build up of abuse, that there's going to be a big blowout coming. That's the point that often people will be able to be able to talk to you. And do you know what? It's about being thoughtful. It's my favourite word this year. It's absolutely going to be my favourite word next year as well. It's about being thoughtful. If you think that someone is a victim of domestic abuse or is a victim of something that is making their world difficult, be thoughtful. Check in with them. Say hello. Be available. Sort of be open and just available for somebody. Be kind and be nice, because they're much more likely to talk to you when they really need to.
Brilliant. Helen has asked, is there anything that a professional should avoid saying or doing that could cause harm?
So don't make any promises you can't keep. Please don't ever say to somebody, come and talk to me, I won't tell anyone else, because you are never going to sit and listen of something of a child protection nature and not tell somebody else. That would be, I can't even think, dangerous is the best word that I can come up with, actually. It would be diabolical. So please don't ever promise anything that you can't keep. We have an A4 page of all of the do's and don'ts of talking to us that is read in its entirety to every single victim of domestic abuse that we support. So you know exactly what's going to happen to the information that's provided. It goes onto a database. The cleaner can't, the housekeeper can't come and see that information, but anyone within the adult team, so that if your own worker isn't there, somebody else would be able to see. If you tell us anything of a high risk nature that makes us fearful that you might be seriously injured or at worst killed, we're going to tell somebody about that. And if there are any child protection or adult protection issues, we're going to have to tell somebody else about that as well. So be clear, what are you going to do with the information that's given to them? And then don't push people to do more than they're ready to do, because you will alienate them and they will never be able to tell you again. The worst thing that can ever happen to a victim of domestic abuse is to spend weeks plucking up courage to go and talk to somebody and then feel betrayed. So be very clear of what your responsibilities are beforehand. Please don't ever push anyone to leave. If you feel that they're unsafe and need to, and they're not, well, then you need to phone either social services or the police or adult services. You need to make sure that you manage that safety in your way, but threatening people to have them leave abusive relationships is never going to get them to talk to you again, or going to get them to make a plan that's safe when they do decide to. So being genuine and kind, I would say, is the best way to support anybody, professional or otherwise.
So Richard's asked about automatic recourse for benefits and housing. So if you have children who previously did not have recourse, are you then, if you're a victim of domestic abuse, does that kick in? Can you explain more about recourse to services for those without children and who best to get information on this area?
So potentially the best thing to do is contact the local benefits agency, because there are concessions, whether you've got children or whether you haven't, but there are so many criteria that you might have to jump through. And actually, there isn't a tick list that we've found. Lately, this has been based on personal circumstances. So I would, if you've got a particular person in mind, I would go to your local Job Centre or Citizens Advice Bureau with as many details as you can to find out whether or not they're entitled. I can't answer all of those questions because I'm not a legal professional to be able to. I would need more details to be able to make a guess. And even then, we have people that want to come into refuge and we need to find out whether they've got recourse for public funding. And sometimes we just can't find out from other agencies because we need more information that's presented to us. So I would call your local DWP if you want more information, but it doesn't have to be that you've got children for you to be entitled to those benefits. There are a whole tranche of circumstances behind that, like where you originally, where you were living before you came into this country.
Brilliant. So a question from Holly, that she too frequently hears about families fleeing abuse in an emergency situation and then finding themselves stuck, whereby local housing authorities can't decide whose responsibility it is to offer refuge. What's your advice in that situation?
So actually, it should be the refuge that's going into battle. This is my favourite thing. Going into battle with somebody that thinks they're right and they're not is my very favourite thing to do. So there shouldn't be any argument. If you've gone into refuge and because you're a victim of domestic abuse, A, you shouldn't have to jump through hoops to prove it. And B, you shouldn't have, there's this big thing at the moment that we've got with loads of councils that are saying, well, you don't live in this area, you've got no local contact. Well, I'm not safe in the areas that I've got local contact, so that's not eligible for somebody that's a victim of domestic abuse. It's a criteria that we don't need to consider. So I would ask that if somebody is saying that you can't make a homeless application in any area in which you decide to go to, then that's for the local services to go into battle. And if need be, we can get shelter on board, other agencies on board to help us to go into battle. But it is something that happens very often. Housing, there is so few council and housing association properties that, often we do have to go into battle to get somebody housed, because you wait so long. You're going to be waiting in refuge for a year, probably at best, if you're going to flee and go to refuge. So
Emma is asking about whether services keep a victim open while they're deciding what they want to do. So Emma's working with a lady who's gone back into the honeymoon period.
So it depends. So if you're talking about domestic abuse services, well, then it would depend, because if your risk is reduced and you're not wanting that support anymore, then no, you're not going to be staying open, because there's an awful lot of victims of domestic abuse in the Kent area. So no, you're not necessarily. But if it might be that the fact that you've gone into the honeymoon period makes us more concerned about you, and definitely we would be keeping you open. So it's depending, that minimization that we often see, there's often patterns again with victims where they're back in the relationship by their use of language and their reluctance to talk about a particular thing. That's the time that we would keep you open, actually, because we know that what's likely to happen is that shorter honeymoon period, that shorter period of time, and you're likely to be then entering back into stages of abuse again. So for us, that might be somebody that we'd keep open, but the victim always has to be in control of any situation when it comes to our support. So if they don't feel they need that support from us anymore, then we will have to close them, because we can't do anything else. We can't force you to talk to us.
As much as I think many of our IDVAs would love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got a question from Sarah about whether there's a template for child safety planning.
Yeah, again, there's a child safety plan on the Women's Aid website if you want to look for that. Just Google child safety planning. They will come up for you. The internet is an amazing thing, isn't it?
It is that. So Jace is asking why there's such a shortage of refuges for men.
Why is there a shortage of all services for men, I think, is the reality. I think that we haven't until very recently taken the needs of males as seriously as we have the needs of females. We know that this is a gendered issue. We know that there's more likely to be female victims of domestic abuse, and we know that it's going to be maybe different if you're a male in a gay relationship or if you're a male that's in a relationship with a woman. There's going to be differences in that abuse as well. So I think that often men are less likely to tell anybody about their abuse. It's about that, again, it's about thinking about your safety planning. I did think about putting a male section up there, but then thought that I'm never going to cover that in 30 minutes, all of the things I need to. I could have been talking to you for the next 4 days and still not covered everything about a safety plan. So I think that there are different issues. I think men are less likely to say. However, you're still entitled to social housing. So you're still entitled to make a homeless application. You're still entitled to temporary accommodation, male or female, it doesn't make any difference. And we are getting better at support. So, the Phoenix programme is being written for males so that we know we've got male victims that are able to be supported. There are male services around. So there are some services and places where you can go as a male. They're just less likely to be refuges at the moment. And hopefully that will change.
So we've got one from Trudy. If you have to make a referral to children's services because the children are in danger of harm, if there is a significant risk of the DA worsening as a result of their interaction, how would you deal with that? So
the referral's been made to children's services because the children are in significant harm, significant risk of DA worsening. I mean, potentially, we would definitely be working along with social services as a partner agency to be able to offer safety planning support. We would be very honest about our concerns for the children and for that victim, because if the risk is increasing to the children, it's definitely increasing to the victim as well. That's the whole family that's at risk. So we would be having those conversations, safety planning conversations. We would be very direct in our conversations about your need to leave and protect your children. So your apathy and not being able to do something sometimes is not a good enough excuse when there are children involved. So we would be having very clear conversations about what safety planning should look like and the things that you need to do. However, we're still going to accept if that's the road that you've gone down, but you need to know what the repercussions are for this. We cannot have children living in high-risk domestic abuse situations being directly at risk themselves. So as DA agencies, we will be very clear of the repercussions of continuing to not make any changes for the benefit and safety of your children.
Sharon has asked, how difficult is it to safety plan with someone with a stalker and technology?
It's incredibly difficult if you're going to keep all of your tech gadgets and your car and all of those things. If you're an old fogey like me and just buys your phone from Tesco's that costs you 20 quid and that gives you £10 worth of top up as well, then actually it's going to be really easy for you to be safe, because most of the stalking and harassment is going to be happening because of your gadgetry, your computer, your tablets, your phones. If you take away that, and maybe your car has got tracking devices, and they're very difficult to find. Tracking devices can be very small, and we only a couple of weeks ago phoned the local garage and said, look, how much is it going to cost for you to look throughout the car? And he said, look, if I'm really honest, Tina, I don't know that we'd find a tracking device. It's about that, being found again means that we're very concerned. So it is about making sure that all of your gadgetry is turned off, making sure that if you're leaving to go to refuge, for example, or leaving the area, you're not turning it back on, or making sure that your locations devices are changed. I Googled how to do this, knowing that someone would ask me a technology question that I wouldn't know the answer to. And I still don't know the answer, but I did manage to get on my phone and follow what it said when I Googled this. So it's not, if I can do it, let me assure you, anybody can do it, because I seek advice off my 12-year-old. If I carry on the way I'm going, my 2-year-old granddaughter will be able to help me better than I can. But even I could follow that advice. So just Google it and then follow the advice. And then you need to think about all of those changes of routine and all of the rest of it. And you definitely need to be talking to agencies, the police, and Paladin was one of those stalking services that I put on, making sure that you're talking to them. Getting a non-molestation order where there's stalking, that's entirely possible as well. So getting the orders that are necessary. And sometimes there is nothing else for it but going to refuge and getting away from the local area and starting again where you can't be found.
But Tina, that pretty much brings us up to 3 o'clock. Are you happy for another couple of questions?
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. There was one from Leonie, and I just think this might be one that a couple of people might resonate with. So a friend of Leonie's partner won't look at me since I've started doing this training, so doing this sort of job. My friend has disclosed a few things to me previously. How do you think I should approach this? So that's that sort of supporting friends and family.
Do you know what? Ask. It's absolutely incredible how many times, if you ask your friend or family member, they'll tell you. Say it just exactly like you've said it to me. Oh, it's really weird. I've been doing this. I've just been sensing. He's not looking at me. He's not giving me eye contact. You do know that I'm always here to listen and support you if you needed me, don't you? I am learning a few things, and it has made me look at every single person in the world as if they're a perpetrator. But I have learned a few things, and if you need me, I'll be here for you. And then maybe next time you could be a little bit more direct if there's something that again alerts you. That I call it witchy paritis. I think it's called tacit knowledge, if I'm going to sound clever. It's that thing that goes on that makes you think, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. First time, be very gentle. First time, make sure that you're saying that you're there. Next time, you can ask a bit more of a direct question. Of course, if there's something that's happened that is of any risk, ask the question. Maybe they are just desperate for somebody to notice and ask them. They could have been waiting weeks or months for you to ask that question, and you haven't done it. So I'd go home tonight and ask it.
This is another one that I think might resonate with quite a few people, and this is from Denise. So very often she hears that family members or friends who are experiencing what I could only explain as compassion fatigue towards someone who is experiencing DA, who are stuck in calm or back in honeymoon periods. And what advice would you give to these people to increase their understanding and compassion?
It's the thing that makes me saddest, I think that I said to somebody fed back actually ages after I'd said this to him. I gave a friends and family discussion. We did a bit of a session to friends and family members about this very thing. And I said to somebody, whenever someone comes in and is supported and says, but my family just don't understand, I think to myself, well, at least they've never been a victim of domestic abuse. because otherwise they would. Because how would you understand? You know, my daughter, my son, my best friend, somebody's being hurt on a regular basis and they keep going back again and again. How would you be able to understand? Well, you guys now do understand, don't you? You understand about the honeymoon periods. You understand about that period of calm and that period of when they're sorry. And we can't take away the fact that we love those people that abuse us very often. It's not just as easy to give up your whole life and walk away. You know, we're talking about you picking up your 2 children with somebody that you've been married to for the last 20 years, packing your whole world into two back carrier bags, jumping on a train to God knows where and going to God knows what refuge in the middle of nowhere. That's not an easy thing to do at all. It's much easier actually to stay in that relationship because you feel like you've got a level of control, and it's a very odd thing to say, but monitoring their behavior, monitoring where they're going, how they're feeling, maybe their behavior is starting to escalate, so you know you're rocking back into that that fear that there's going to be a escalation or a incident that's going to be harmful to everybody. At least you know you're there and watching. Anybody that's able to watch Murdered by My Boyfriend, which was on, I think it was on BBC One, absolutely just depicts this perfectly. You know, she absolutely believed that she was never going to be able to leave that abuse, never going to be able to have anyone else in her life, and so she returned to that relationship. And it is difficult to understand, but now all of you understand that. You've all got that honeymoon period, the cycle of abuse, all of those things, because actually the minute you've entered back into that relationship is the time that we find it difficult to understand. And that's the very time that we need to be the most understanding and the most here. We're not walking away from you again. We're just sitting here quietly waiting when you want to come back to us. That's what we all need to do. So just talk about the things that you've learned today. And hopefully that will be enough, because those good, decent, kind and wonderful people will still be around waiting patiently.
Brilliant. And I think that it's so interesting, isn't it? Because this is, again, something that sparks an awful lot of conversation and maybe a lack of compassion as well. Even, you know, when we're talking in the refuge, is about maybe someone who's refused to go to a safe place because they've got pets and they won't leave pets.
So we've got the drugs trust.
Yeah, and Faye is actually here, and she's Rebecca is working for the Dogs Trust, so she's just put in something at the bottom there, so that absolutely the Dogs Trust.
And going to foster placements as well. But do you know what? There are absolutely times where there was somebody somewhere in the county last month who wouldn't go anywhere because of their rabbit. There absolutely is they're your babies, particularly if you haven't got any children. They are your babies. So, you know, it's really difficult to get police officers sometimes to understand, house the rabbit temporarily and we'll be able to house the victim. So, you know, it's about being creative. I can't house the bunny for you. I'm allergic to them. So let's not all start running around housing everyone's parrot and bunny in the world. But absolutely, my mum looked after my cats. I don't know that I'd have left them behind. My cat was bald for 3 years until I moved, and then she had fur all of a sudden. She wasn't happy in that relationship, and I wouldn't have left her. And I had 2 children. So absolutely, let's find a way between us to house every rabbit and every parrot, because the Dogs Trust have covered the cats and dogs.
Brilliant. So Emma is working with someone, and due to COVID, the perpetrator is around a lot more. So it's very difficult to talk to her on the phone. Have you got any tips?
So firstly, code words. We can do this really quickly with somebody. What's the expression that you're going to use that you can't talk? You know, am I an Avon representative that's phoning you up to see if I can cold call you into being an Avon rep, that you can tell me, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in helping you with Avon today? Because that tells me that the perpetrator's home. So have a code word with them that enables you to have that conversation. And maybe that's a text message. Is it safe to email? Is it safe to text? Lots and lots and lots of our IDVAs, our independent domestic violence advisors working with high risk, have been emailing and texting during COVID lockdown, because it's easier for those conversations to be deleted quickly. So, but never do that unless you know that it's safe to do that. You absolutely need to know that that's a safe thing to do. But I probably suggest that our emails to victims has gone up by 1/3 since we entered COVID. So maybe that's a bit more of a creative way to be able to do that. And of course, we can all go out for a walk. So, you know, is that a possibility that we can be more creative in how we approach contacting people? But I would suggest first contact with somebody, make a plan of what's going to happen when it's not safe to speak. Have a code word.
Brilliant. And a similar one from Olivia about how you can signpost people without it being obvious to the abuser.
So lots of the websites, including the Oasis website and all of the, I'm sure all of the other services around the county have a way in which you can hide the fact that you've been on a website in the first place. So it's about making sure that you do that, not storing telephone numbers. So we wouldn't advise anyone stores a telephone number of my IDVA, Tina, because they're going to look up what IDVA says, or Oasis, or it's about being slightly more creative in how you save names and organisations that you're working with, and making sure that you're covering your tracks on your phone bill, making sure that you're asking people to call you back, making sure that you're planning in advance if there's going to be questions that you're not going to be able to answer. And again, that's about planning, isn't it? Safety planning in advance for every eventuality. Did that answer the question, Iona?
I think so. I hope so. Do pop in the chat.
Forever and don't get to remember what I was answering in the first place, and I didn't know whether I did it then.
No, I think that was all right. I think, Tina, that was a really wonderful session. Thank you so much. I know we haven't quite got to all of those questions that came in, but this will be published. So this recording will be published. That will be sent to you guys in a couple of days. So you will have access to all of those slides again. And we are going to try and do some sort of mop up of all of these beautiful Q&A questions at the end. So the recording is going to be available. It will be sent to you. There are lots more upcoming events. So we're just at the very beginning of this 16 days. So do go to the website and have a little look if there's anything else that you want to sign up for. So that's daeverybodiesbusiness.org to register for those. We can keep the conversation going with the hashtag #DaEverybody'sBusiness and no see speak out. And I think the last thing for me to say that if today's raised anything for you personally and you'd like to find out more about the services that are available, do go to the Domestic Abuse Services website. There's a lovely interactive map there with all of the services that are available throughout Kent. Or as popped up on screen earlier, there are those numbers and you can go through to those and they'll get you to the right place.